Maria Santos was born in a small village where girls were expected to cook, clean, and marry young. But Maria was different. While other children played with dolls, she collected empty bottles and cans, arranging them in strange patterns in her backyard. Her grandmother would shake her head, wondering what strange ideas filled the girl's mind. At school, Maria excelled in science, but her teachers dismissed her dreams as impossible fantasies. When she announced she wanted to become a doctor, the whole classroom erupted in laughter. Even her own father chuckled, patting her head like she had told a funny joke. In their village, no woman had ever become a doctor. The nearest hospital was 3 hours away, and most people had never even met a female doctor. Maria's family struggled to put food on the table. Her father worked as a farmhand, and her mother took in laundry from wealthier families in the next town. Education beyond primary school seemed like an impossible dream, especially for a girl. When Maria turned 14, her parents started discussing marriage proposals from local families. They meant well, believing that a good husband would provide security their daughter needed. But Maria had a secret. Every evening after finishing her chores, she would sneak into the village library, which was really just a small room attached to the church. Father Miguel, the kind priest, had noticed her curiosity and quietly allowed her to borrow medical books that traveling missionaries sometimes left behind. She would study by candlelight, memorizing anatomy diagrams and disease symptoms until her eyes burned with exhaustion. The turning point came during a terrible flu outbreak that swept through the village. The nearest doctor couldn't come because of flooded roads and people were dying. Maria watched helplessly as her neighbor's baby struggled with high fever. Something inside her snapped. She remembered reading about fever, reduction techniques, and convinced the desperate mother to try cooling baths and herbal teas she had learned about from the medical books. The baby's fever broke the next morning. Word spread quickly through the small community. Soon other families were quietly asking Maria for help. She felt both terrified and exhilarated. This was what she wanted to do with her life. But she knew the village elders would be furious if they discovered a young girl was practicing medicine without training. One evening, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She approached Father Miguel and confessed her dream of becoming a real doctor. She expected him to discourage her, but instead his eyes lit up with understanding. He had been watching her dedication and intelligence for months. Father Miguel revealed that he had connections with a medical school in the capital city, 300 miles away. The priest offered to help Maria apply for a scholarship, but there was a catch. The application required a demonstration of medical knowledge that went far beyond what anyone expected a village girl to possess. Maria would need to present something revolutionary, something that proved she deserved a chance despite her background. That night, Maria stared at the ceiling of her small bedroom, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought about all the times she had been told her dreams were impossible. She remembered the baby whose life she had helped save, and all the other villagers who had quietly sought her help. A crazy idea began forming in her mind, something so unconventional that it might just work. She started planning what she would later call her invisible shot, a medical innovation that nobody saw coming from a girl who wasn't supposed to amount to anything. Maria knew she had only one chance to prove that dreams don't recognize the limitations others place on us. She began working on her secret project, knowing that success would open doors to her future, while failure would confirm everyone's doubts about her abilities. The next few weeks would determine whether Maria Santos would spend her life as another forgotten village girl, or become the doctor she had always dreamed of being. As she gathered materials for her project, she could almost hear the whispers that would follow her success. They said it couldn't be done until her invisible shot changed everything. Maria's secret project began in the most unlikely place, an abandoned chicken coop behind her family's house. While her parents thought she was collecting eggs or cleaning the old structure, Maria was actually transforming it into a makeshift laboratory. She used empty glass jars her mother had thrown away, old metal spoons, and even broken pieces of mirrors to create her research space. The inspiration for her invisible shot came from watching her grandmother treat sick animals. The old woman had a special way of healing wounded birds and stray dogs using natural remedies that seemed to work like magic. But Maria realized it wasn't magic at all. It was science that nobody had properly documented or studied. Maria began collecting different plants, roots, and herbs from the forest near their village. She carefully recorded which combinations her grandmother used for different ailments. But Maria wanted to go deeper. She started experimenting with plant extracts, trying to understand exactly which compounds were responsible for the healing effects. Using techniques she had learned from the medical books, she created her own crude methods for separating and concentrating active ingredients. The biggest challenge was keeping her work secret. Maria had to be extremely careful about when and how she conducted her experiments. She would wake up before dawn to check on her plant preparations and often worked late into the night by moonlight. Her parents occasionally asked about the strange smells coming from the old chicken coop. But Maria always had ready excuses about cleaning supplies or herbal teas for the family. After weeks of experimentation, Maria made a breakthrough. She discovered that certain plant combinations, when prepared in a specific way, could be absorbed through the skin without causing any visible marks or reactions. This was her invisible shot, a method of delivering medicine that left no trace, making it perfect for treating patients who might be embarrassed about their conditions or unable to take traditional medications. Maria tested her innovation first on herself, applying small amounts to check for allergic reactions. Then she carefully tried it on sick chickens that still lived around the old coop. The results were remarkable. Chickens with respiratory infections recovered faster than those treated with conventional methods. More importantly, there was no way to tell which chickens had been treated just by looking at them. Word of Maria's success with the animals began to spread quietly through the village. People started bringing their sick pets to her, and she helped them using her invisible treatment method. An old man with arthritis in his hands allowed Maria to try her technique on him. Within days, his pain had decreased significantly, and nobody could tell he had received any treatment at all. But Maria's growing reputation also brought unwanted attention. The village traditional healer, a woman named Doña Carmen, began to feel threatened by Maria's success. Doña Carmen had been the go-to person for medical problems for over 20 years, and she didn't appreciate competition from a teenage girl. She started spreading rumors that Maria was practicing witchcraft and using dangerous methods that could harm people. The situation became more complicated when Maria successfully treated the blacksmith's daughter, who had been suffering from a skin condition that Doña Carmen couldn't cure. The girl's recovery was so complete and rapid that people began openly comparing the two healers. Some villagers defended Maria, saying she had genuine knowledge and skill. Others worried that she was too young and inexperienced to be trusted with serious medical problems. Maria realized she needed to document her work more carefully if she wanted to present it to the medical school. She began keeping detailed records of every patient she treated, noting their symptoms, the treatment she provided, and the results. She drew diagrams of the plants she used and wrote down exact measurements and preparation methods. The pressure was building from all sides. Her parents were becoming suspicious about her activities. Doña Carmen was actively working against her, and the deadline for the medical school application was approaching rapidly. Maria knew she needed to take a bold step to prove her method worked, but she also risked everything if her secret was discovered before she was ready. One evening, Father Miguel approached Maria with urgent news. A government health inspector would be visiting the village next month to investigate reports of unlicensed medical practice. If they discovered Maria's activities, she could face serious legal consequences. But Father Miguel also saw this as an opportunity. If Maria could demonstrate her invisible shot technique to the inspector under controlled conditions, it might be exactly the proof she needed for her medical school application. Maria faced the biggest decision of her young life. She could abandon her project and return to the safe but limited life her family had planned for her, or she could risk everything on one dramatic demonstration that would either launch her medical career or destroy her dreams forever. As she sat in her makeshift laboratory that night, surrounded by her carefully prepared medicines and detailed notes, Maria knew there was really only one choice she could make. The day of the government health inspector's visit arrived with unexpected drama. Dr. Rodriguez, a stern man in his 50s, had come to investigate reports of unauthorized medical practice in the village. He was accompanied by a nurse and a local police officer, making it clear that this was a serious investigation. The entire village buzzed with nervous energy as people whispered about who might be in trouble. Maria's heart pounded as she watched the inspector set up his temporary examination station in the village square. Father Miguel had arranged for Maria to demonstrate her technique. but she was terrified that Dr. Rodriguez would dismiss her as just another village girl playing with dangerous folk remedies. She had prepared her best samples and organized her notes. But standing there watching the professional medical team work, she felt incredibly small and inexperienced. The inspector began by examining several villagers who had complained about various ailments. Maria watched carefully, noting how he diagnosed conditions and prescribed treatments. She was impressed by his knowledge, but also noticed that some of his recommendations were expensive medications that most villagers couldn't afford. This gave her courage. Her invisible shot method could provide effective treatment using locally available materials. When Father Miguel finally introduced Maria to Dr. Rodriguez, the inspector's reaction was exactly what she had feared. He looked at her with barely concealed annoyance, clearly thinking this was a waste of his valuable time. "Father, I'm here to investigate serious medical violations, not to humor children playing doctor," he said dismissively. The police officer chuckled and Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Father Miguel was persistent. He explained that Maria had been achieving remarkable results with a completely new treatment method, and that several villagers had specifically requested to be examined by both the inspector and Maria for comparison. Dr. Rodriguez reluctantly agreed to observe, but warned that if Maria was found to be practicing medicine without a license, there would be serious consequences. The first test case was Don Fernando, an elderly farmer who had been suffering from severe joint pain for months. Dr. Rodriguez examined him thoroughly and confirmed arthritis in both hands and knees. He prescribed expensive anti-inflammatory medications and recommended physiotherapy treatments that would require travel to the distant city hospital. The cost would have bankrupted Don Fernando's family. Maria stepped forward nervously and asked permission to demonstrate her alternative approach. Dr. Rodriguez crossed his arms and waited impatiently as Maria carefully applied her invisible treatment to Don Fernando's affected joints. The application took only a few minutes and left no visible marks or residue. To anyone watching, it looked like Maria had simply touched the old man's hands and knees with what appeared to be plain water. "That's it?" Dr. Rodriguez asked skeptically. "You've done nothing that I can observe. This is exactly the kind of fake medicine that gives real medical professionals a bad reputation." Maria asked him to wait 24 hours before making a final judgment, but the inspector seemed ready to end the demonstration immediately. However, something unexpected happened. Don Fernando began moving his fingers more freely within minutes of Maria's treatment. At first, everyone assumed it was just psychological, but as the afternoon progressed, the improvement became undeniable. The old farmer was able to grip objects firmly and walk without his usual limping gait. By evening, he was moving his hands and arms in ways he hadn't been able to for months. Dr. Rodriguez was forced to admit that something significant had happened, but he insisted it must be a temporary psychological effect. He agreed to return the next day to observe Don Fernando's condition and examine other cases. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. Everything depended on whether her treatment would show lasting effects or if the inspector would dismiss it as coincidence. The next morning brought even more dramatic results. Don Fernando was not only maintaining his improved mobility, but several other villagers who had witnessed the demonstration begged Maria to treat their own chronic conditions. Word had spread overnight, and people were arriving from neighboring villages to see the girl who could provide invisible medicine. Dr. Rodriguez returned to find a crowd of hopeful patients waiting for him. He was clearly disturbed by the situation, uncertain how to handle what he was observing. Maria treated 3 more volunteers under his direct supervision, each time using her invisible shot method on different types of conditions. A woman with chronic headaches, a young man with persistent skin problems, and a child with recurring stomach issues. The inspector watched every step of Maria's process, taking notes and asking detailed questions about her methods. He was surprised by the depth of her knowledge about plant chemistry and impressed by her careful documentation of previous treatments. As the day progressed, his attitude toward Maria began to shift from skepticism to genuine scientific curiosity. By the 3rd day, all of Maria's demonstration patients were showing remarkable improvement. Dr. Rodriguez could no longer dismiss the results as coincidence or psychological effects. He found himself in an unprecedented situation. A teenage village girl had apparently developed an effective medical treatment using methods he didn't understand, and she was achieving results that rivaled conventional medicine. The inspector faced a difficult decision. Technically, Maria was practicing medicine without a license, which was illegal, but her methods were clearly helping people, and her knowledge base was more extensive than many licensed practitioners he had encountered. Moreover, her treatment costs were practically nothing compared to conventional medications, making health care accessible to people who had never been able to afford proper medical care. On his final day in the village, Dr. Rodriguez made an announcement that shocked everyone, including Maria herself. Instead of arresting her or shutting down her practice, he was going to recommend her for immediate admission to the National Medical University, with a full scholarship and a special research position to study and develop her invisible shot technique under proper scientific supervision. Maria's arrival at the National Medical University created an immediate sensation. News of the village girl with the revolutionary invisible treatment had spread throughout the medical community, and everyone wanted to see if her methods could withstand academic scrutiny. Some professors were excited about the potential breakthrough, while others were skeptical that anything valuable could come from folk medicine practices. The university was overwhelming for Maria. She had never seen buildings so tall, libraries so vast, or laboratories so sophisticated. Her dormitory room was larger than her entire family's kitchen back home. The other students came from wealthy families and had attended prestigious preparatory schools. Many spoke multiple languages and had traveled internationally. Maria felt completely out of place and worried that she had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the head of the pharmacology department, became Maria's mentor and research supervisor. Dr. Chen was brilliant and demanding, with a reputation for either making or breaking promising students. She was intrigued by Maria's invisible shot technique, but insisted that every aspect of it needed to be thoroughly tested and scientifically validated before it could be taken seriously by the medical establishment. The first challenge was reproducing Maria's results under controlled laboratory conditions. What had worked perfectly in her village chicken coop proved much more difficult to achieve using university equipment and standardized procedures. The plant extracts that had been so effective at home seemed to lose their potency when prepared using modern scientific methods. Maria spent weeks trying to understand why her traditional techniques worked better than sophisticated laboratory processes. Other students were not always welcoming. Some resented that Maria had been admitted through special circumstances rather than following the normal competitive examination process. They whispered that she was just a publicity stunt and that her folk remedies would never stand up to real scientific analysis. A few students openly mocked her background and suggested she should return to her village where people were gullible enough to believe in magic. Cures, Maria's first major presentation, to the faculty was a disaster. She tried to explain her methods using the technical language she had been studying, but she stumbled over complex terminology and couldn't answer detailed questions about molecular structures and biochemical pathways. Several professors exchanged glances that clearly indicated they thought the university had made a mistake in admitting her. Dr. Chen looked disappointed, and Maria left the room feeling humiliated and defeated. That night, Maria seriously considered giving up and returning home. She called her family, and her mother's voice brought tears to her eyes. But when she explained her struggles, her grandmother's words came back to her through her mother. The old ways work, because they understand the whole plant, not just pieces of it. Don't let them make you forget what you already know. This advice sparked a new approach. Instead of trying to adapt her methods to modern laboratory standards, Maria began investigating why traditional preparation techniques might be superior in some cases. She discovered that her village methods preserved certain delicate compounds that were destroyed by standard extraction processes. The crude techniques she had learned from her grandmother were actually more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Working with Dr. Chen, Maria developed a hybrid approach that combined traditional knowledge with modern scientific analysis. They found that her invisible shot worked because it delivered multiple active compounds simultaneously, through a delivery system that had been perfected over generations of traditional use. The technique was invisible not just because it left no marks, but because it worked at a molecular level that conventional medicine hadn't fully understood. The breakthrough came when Maria successfully treated a group of laboratory mice with chronic inflammatory conditions. Using her adapted invisible shot method, she achieved better results than standard anti-inflammatory drugs, with fewer side effects and lower costs. The mice showed rapid improvement, and follow-up studies confirmed that the healing was genuine and lasting. Word of Maria's success began to spread beyond the university. Medical journals started requesting articles about her research, and pharmaceutical companies expressed interest in developing her techniques for commercial use. But Maria was careful not to let the attention go to her head. She remembered the struggles of her village and was determined that any treatments she developed would remain accessible to poor communities. The real test came when Dr. Chen arranged for Maria to present her research at the International Conference on Alternative Medicine. This would be Maria's chance to prove that her invisible shot technique deserved recognition from the global medical community. Thousands of doctors, researchers, and pharmaceutical executives would attend, and Maria's presentation could either establish her as a serious innovator or expose her as an overrated amateur. Preparing for the conference required months of intensive work. Maria had to develop presentation materials, prepare research data, and practice answering questions from experts who knew far more about medicine than she did. Dr. Chen pushed her relentlessly, but Maria could see that her mentor was starting to believe that they might actually have discovered something revolutionary. As the conference date approached, Maria received both encouragement and warnings from various sources. Some colleagues advised her to be cautious about revealing too much detail about her methods, fearing that larger companies might steal her ideas. Others warned that the international medical establishment was notoriously conservative and might reject her work simply because it challenged conventional approaches. The night before her presentation, Maria stood on the university balcony looking at the city lights and thinking about her journey from village chicken coop to international medical conference. She thought about Don Fernando and all the other villagers who had trusted her with their health, and about Dr. Rodriguez who had taken a risk by recommending her for university admission. Tomorrow would determine whether her invisible shot technique would change modern medicine or whether she would return to obscurity as just another failed experiment. Maria knew that regardless of what happened at the conference, she had already accomplished something that everyone had said was impossible. A poor village girl with no formal training had developed a medical innovation that impressed university professors and attracted international attention. But she also knew that the biggest challenges still lay ahead. The International Conference on Alternative Medicine was held in Geneva, Switzerland, and Maria had never imagined she would see such a place. The conference center was enormous, filled with doctors, researchers, and medical professionals from every continent. Simultaneous translation systems allowed presentations in dozens of languages, and the latest medical technologies were displayed throughout the facility. Maria's presentation was scheduled for the second day. In a session dedicated to innovative treatment approaches, she would have 30 minutes to present her research, followed by a question-and-answer period that could determine her professional future. The audience would include some of the most respected names in international medicine, people whose textbooks Maria had studied and whose research had shaped modern medical practice. The morning of her presentation, Maria received an unexpected visitor in her hotel room. Dr. James Morrison, the chairman of Global Health Solutions, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, wanted to meet with her privately before her presentation. Dr. Morrison was charming and persuasive, explaining that his company could provide unlimited resources to develop her invisible shot technique into commercial products that could help millions of people worldwide. However, Dr. Morrison's offer came with conditions that made Maria uncomfortable. The company would own all rights to her technique, and they would decide how it was manufactured, distributed, and priced. When Maria asked about making the treatment available to poor communities like her own village, Dr. Morrison smiled and said that would be handled through their charitable foundation after the company had recovered its development costs. Maria politely declined the meeting, but Dr. Morrison's visit reminded her of the high stakes involved in her presentation. Powerful interests were watching her work, and the decision she made today could affect not just her own future, but the lives of countless patients who needed affordable medical care. When Maria took the stage for her presentation, she felt surprisingly calm. She had spent months preparing, and Dr. Chen had coached her extensively on handling difficult questions. She began by explaining her background and the traditional knowledge that had inspired her research, then demonstrated her technique using volunteer patients who had various chronic conditions. The audience watched with growing interest as Maria applied her invisible shot treatment to patients with arthritis, skin conditions, and digestive problems. The treatment process looked deceptively simple, but Maria explained the complex chemistry and carefully controlled application methods that made it effective. She presented data from her university research, showing success rates that compared favorably to conventional treatments at a fraction of the cost. During the question period, Maria faced intense scrutiny from experts who challenged every aspect of her work. A professor from Harvard questioned whether her results could be replicated in different climates using plants that weren't native to her region. A researcher from Tokyo asked detailed questions about potential side effects and long-term safety studies. A doctor from London wondered if the technique would work on patients with different genetic backgrounds and dietary habits. Maria answered each question carefully, acknowledging limitations in her research while explaining the scientific principles behind her methods. She admitted that more studies were needed, but pointed out that her technique had been used safely in her village for over a year, with no adverse effects. She also emphasized that her approach was based on traditional knowledge that had been tested over generations, not just laboratory experiments. The turning point came when Dr. Sarah Williams, a respected epidemiologist from the World Health Organization, asked Maria about her long-term goals for the technique. Maria's answer surprised everyone in the room. Instead of talking about patents, profits, or professional recognition, she spoke passionately about making effective healthcare accessible to people who had been forgotten by the modern medical system. Maria explained that her invisible shot technique could be taught to community health workers in remote areas, allowing them to provide effective treatment using locally available materials. She envisioned a network of village healers who combined traditional knowledge with modern scientific understanding, bringing quality healthcare to places where doctors and hospitals were unavailable or unaffordable. The audience was silent for a moment after Maria finished speaking, then erupted in sustained applause. Dr. Williams stood up and announced that the WHO was prepared to fund a comprehensive study of Maria's technique, with the goal of developing training programs for community health workers in developing countries. Several other organizations immediately offered to collaborate on the project. After her presentation, Maria was surrounded by reporters, researchers, and medical professionals who wanted to learn more about her work. She gave interviews to medical journals, television networks, and international health organizations. The story of the village girl who had revolutionized medicine with her invisible shot captured public imagination around the world, but Maria's greatest satisfaction came from a phone call she received that evening from Father Miguel. He told her that a team of WHO researchers had arrived in her village to begin documenting traditional healing practices and training local health workers in her techniques. Don Fernando, the old farmer who had been her first demonstration patient, had been hired as a consultant to help evaluate other traditional remedies that might have scientific potential. The conference had transformed Maria from an unknown student into an international figure, but she was already thinking about her next challenge. She wanted to return to medical school to complete her degree, then establish a research institute that would bridge the gap between traditional knowledge and modern science. She envisioned a place where village healers could work alongside university researchers to develop treatments that were both scientifically valid and culturally appropriate. As Maria prepared to return home for a brief visit before continuing her studies, she reflected on how much had changed since she first started experimenting in her grandmother's chicken coop. She had proven that innovation could come from the most unexpected places, and that traditional knowledge deserved respect from the scientific community. The invisible shot that had started as a desperate attempt to help her neighbors had become a symbol of hope for millions of people who needed affordable health care. Maria knew that her real work was just beginning, but she also knew that she had already accomplished something that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. She had changed the conversation about what medicine could be and who could contribute to medical progress. 5 years after the Geneva Conference, Maria's invisible shot technique had been implemented in over 40 countries across 3 continents. The WHO training programs had certified thousands of community health workers who could now provide effective treatment for common conditions, using locally sourced materials and Maria's innovative methods. Rural communities that had never had access to affordable health care were now seeing dramatic improvements in public health outcomes. Maria had completed her medical degree with highest honors and established the Global Traditional Medicine Research Institute, located strategically between her home village and the National University. The institute brought together village healers, university researchers, pharmaceutical scientists, and international health experts to study and develop traditional remedies using modern scientific methods. The success of Maria's approach had inspired a worldwide movement toward integrative medicine that respected both traditional knowledge and scientific rigor. Medical schools around the world now offered courses in traditional healing practices, and pharmaceutical companies were partnering with indigenous communities to develop new treatments based on ancient wisdom. But Maria's greatest pride was in the transformation of her own village. The community that had once dismissed her dreams as impossible was now a thriving center of medical innovation. The old chicken coop where she had conducted her first experiments had been converted into a memorial and museum, visited by medical students and researchers from around the world who wanted to see where the invisible shot revolution had begun. Don Fernando, now in his 80s, had become something of a celebrity as the first patient to benefit from Maria's technique. He still lived independently and continued to help train new community health workers, sharing his experience as living proof that traditional medicine could achieve remarkable results. His arthritis had never returned, and he often joked that Maria's invisible shot had made him younger instead of older. Father Miguel had been promoted to bishop partly because of his role in recognizing and supporting Maria's talents. He now oversaw a network of church-sponsored health clinics that combined spiritual care with Maria's medical techniques. The priest who had once worried about a young girl's impossible dreams now preached sermons about the importance of nurturing unconventional talents and believing in seemingly impossible possibilities. Maria's parents had initially struggled to understand their daughter's fame and success, but they had adapted with grace and pride. Her mother now managed a cooperative that grew and processed medicinal plants for the institute, providing income for dozens of village families. Her father had learned to read and write so he could help document traditional farming methods that supported medicinal plant cultivation. The institute had also attracted international attention from major pharmaceutical companies, but Maria had been careful to maintain control over how her techniques were developed and distributed. She had established a foundation that ensured any commercial applications of her work would provide royalties to support community health programs in developing countries. The invisible shot could never be patented in a way that prevented poor communities from accessing the treatment. Dr. Chen had joined Maria at the institute as research director, and their partnership had produced dozens of new treatments based on traditional remedies from cultures around the world. They had published over 50 scientific papers and trained hundreds of researchers in their hybrid methodology that combined traditional knowledge with modern analysis techniques. The impact extended far beyond medicine. Maria's story had become a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized and nurtured, regardless of someone's background or circumstances. Educational programs now actively sought out promising students from remote and disadvantaged communities, providing scholarships and support systems that helped them succeed in academic environments. Maria herself had become a sought-after speaker and consultant, but she remained grounded in her original mission of making healthcare accessible to everyone. She still spent several days each week working directly with patients, and she insisted that all researchers at her institute maintain regular contact with the communities they served. The invisible shot technique had evolved far beyond its original form. Researchers had identified the active compounds responsible for its effectiveness and developed new applications for treating conditions ranging from diabetes to depression. But the core principle remained the same: effective medicine that could be administered simply, safely, and affordably in any setting. On the 10th anniversary of her first conference presentation, Maria was invited to address the United Nations General Assembly about global health equity. Standing before representatives from every nation on Earth, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small village where girls weren't expected to dream big to an international platform where she could advocate for healthcare justice. In her speech, Maria emphasized that her success wasn't really about one person's achievements, but about the importance of listening to wisdom that exists in every community around the world. She challenged the assembly to imagine how many other Maria Santos might be living in villages and urban slums, possessing knowledge and talents that could solve global problems if given the opportunity to develop and share their gifts. As Maria concluded her address, She announced the launch of a new global initiative to identify and support young innovators from marginalized communities in every country. The program would provide education, mentorship, and resources to help them develop solutions to local problems that could have worldwide impact. The standing ovation that followed Maria's speech was not just recognition of her personal accomplishments, but acknowledgement of a fundamental truth she had proven. Innovation and wisdom can emerge from anywhere, and the most powerful solutions often come from people who understand problems firsthand because they have lived with them. That evening, as Maria called her village to share news of her UN appearance, she could hear the pride and joy in the voices of people who had watched her grow from a curious child into a global leader. They reminded her that she would always be their Maria, the girl who had refused to accept that her dreams were impossible. The invisible shot that had started as a desperate experiment in a chicken coop had indeed changed everything, not just for Maria but for millions of people around the world who now had access to health care they had never imagined possible. And in villages everywhere, young people were looking at Maria's example and daring to believe that they too might change the world, one impossible dream at a time.